submersible or going into deep tunnels, because of course there's obvious risk to those things. You can't believe there's a similar risk of piracy on a cruise ship, can you? Perhaps you do.
Yeah, I do actually, because then you hear of things like an outbreak of a virus or something like that,
Yeah.
spreads, and then they have to dock and try to do whatever they do, quarantine or whatever, you
Yeah.
know. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. That wouldn't have happened to these people if they just, not gone on it, for instance.
You sound quite risk averse.
I
That's the
know
thing. I mean,
it sounds
you
unadventurous.
know,
It sounds unadventurous, and I accept that, you know. And then when I hear about helicopter crashing, I think,
yeah.
oh, maybe if they just went on a coach, for instance, or just drove, they could
Well,
have
that's true. Yeah.
they could have avoided that, rather than trying to get there on on time.
So you're fairly uptight about leaving your home by the sound of it, aren't
Don't
you?
really like getting into situations that I know it's it could have been avoided. Uh,
Mm,
and that sounds really, really very unadventurous. But I just think, uh, if that didn't happen, then you wouldn't experience life really. So I suppose it's a bit restrictive, isn't it? In a sense.
it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a bit restrictive in a sense. So I can say that I live a restrictive lifestyle, kind of, Say, for instance, I've had friends say, we're going camping,
Mm,
in Scotland, for instance. So it's gonna be cold, so we're shopping for this and that, and I'm thinking, right. And they say, well, wouldn't you want to come? I'm like, no. Don't you want to, I'm like, no. They go, why? And I say, well, the only time you should sleep outdoors is if your house was on fire, for instance. And yeah.
Are you deliberately are you deliberately sort of doing a comedy show here? It's good. I like it. Give up the day job and be a stand-up comic, Emmy.
Yeah.
If your house is on fire, I don't think you're going to go and sleep in the garden, are you?
Well, this is the thing. You like me. Well, that's the only time for me that camping would be justified. You think, right? You know what? The house burned down anyway, so
I take it you've never have you ever camped in a tent?
no, no,
No.
never. Not even in back garden. No, I just I just stay indoors. I just I just
You go out driving much? Because
I
if
do.
on a more serious point, you can read a lot about nasty vehicle, car accidents, vehicle accidents, and that
True.
on your idea that if you see something that reminds you there's a risk to something, a risk attached to it, you might not do it. But you don't see the same with driving.
Very true. Very true. And I don't know why. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. I suppose it's like if you don't drive, then you'd never get anywhere. So
No,
you'd have a proper phobia. You'd have a proper phobia on your hands then, I don't know what kind of
agoraphobia.
phobia.
Yeah,
Agoraphobia is that what they call it.
yeah,
So, which you then need treatment for. Um, and I
yeah.
guess and I guess I'm glad I'm not that way. But every other thing, I look at it, I weigh up, and I think, nah, I don't want to go. I just like festivals and stuff like that. I'd be like, oh yeah, do you want
Yeah.
to go to this festival? I'm like, what if a terrorist came there and started shooting everyone? I'll be dead then.
It's true, but I'm wondering here if you're playing devil's advocate a bit, are you?
Am
To
I?
make our discussion. I don't really believe, Cuz, that you are frightened of, you know, going on a boat on the sea, going in an aeroplane, going down tunnels, all the other things you've said,
I would.
because you really would have a very limited going down tunnels, all the other things you've said,
Uh-huh.
because you really would have a very limited existence. And I don't know you that well in terms of what you do socially or whatever, but I think I know you enough to know that you do go out and about. You don't seem nervous about going out.
I'm
So I
not.
wonder if you're really playing devil's advocate a bit here.
I'm not. And I'll tell you something. If I do go out, right, I never let anyone walk that close to me. Don't walk that close to me. If somebody's walking behind me, I'd like to just see what they're up to.
You
Gee,
need a
and
couple of wing mirrors.
I'll tell you why. No, I constantly, if I have a shadow, I constantly
Yeah,
look at my shadow, to see how close they've come to me,
yeah,
to being close to me. I'd look at the shadow, and occasionally I'd glance over my shoulder and just see if if they're walking too close to me. And another thing that I do is if I'm at a bus stop or whatever, I like to check my surroundings and just see. And I'll tell you
yeah,
why. You can call it paranoia or anything, but um this guy, there was three guys that were stabbed earlier in the year, um, by some deranged guy. Not necessarily deranged, but with a mental health kind of, health problems. And I'm thinking to myself, if only they'd been a bit cautious, if only
yeah.
they hadn't been that relaxed, just walking around and going, yeah, everything's all right, I'm safe. I don't walk around like that. I walk around like, what are you up to?
Who are you looking at?
Not in an aggressive way, but in a cautious way, I'm like, what are you up to there? And I like to just make a dash out of the way,
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point, a serious point, that this in this day and age, it is good to have awareness of what's going on around you. Um, I think that's very wise. You know, people come and snatch phones, they come and snatch a woman's handbag, and all those things.
Yeah,
But again, I think it's a shame, really, that we almost think about these things too much. I think fear can be a bit destructive.
it
And
is.
although, as I say, I agree totally, be aware of what's going on around you. The fact is, most tragedies happen because somebody does something utterly unexpected.
Yeah,
And maybe even having your wits about you wouldn't have made any difference to that. I don't
yeah,
know, but I think we have to live life, and I think we have to accept that there will always be a degree of risk about things we do. And I guess if we still do them, we will call it a calculated risk that it's not going to happen too often to people. These awful stories we hear about and read about really are very rare, thank God. Um, but yeah, it's a pity if it gives you a limitation or gives anybody a limitation on what they think they can do. I mean, like you, I don't think I will go on a helicopter. I think the statistics of helicopters is not like aeroplanes. They are definitely a more risky mode of transport. I mean, I was interested to see that I gather the Queen and Prince Charles, as he was then, they had big arguments with William because he's a helicopter pilot. He was in the forces, I believe, and he was always taking Catherine and their kids um, in the same helicopter. Whereas I think the Queen and Prince Charles always had this arrangement. They would never travel on a helicopter together because, two monarchs and a chain of monarchs could have been wiped out.
yeah,
Anyway, William insisted that he would do this. And in a way, I say good for him. He doesn't want to be bogged down for rules he doesn't like. Having said that, if God forbid, if anything happened to him and his family in a helicopter, it would wipe out